hey, I have a payload. I am launching it in 90 days. I need a bus. Like 90 days is, for the listeners here who are familiar with the space industry, deciding on a satellite bus 90 days before launch is unheard of. There are more and more of those opportunities, frankly, than I expected.
Thousands of companies show up to sell their technology to the US Department of Defense each year. But so few will transition from proof of concept to true production across the valley of death. The select few who do, their stories are rarely told. Until now. I'm Noah Scheinbaum, and this is Crossing the Valley. Hey everyone, my guest today is Ian Cinnamon, the co-founder and CEO of Apex Space, the world's first spacecraft manufacturer to offer productized, configurable satellite bus platforms. Apex moves fast. They assembled, integrated, and tested their first satellite bus less than a year after they started their design. And Ian is an incredible founder. He's a repeat founder who started multiple companies, has moved from software to hardware, and he's routinely described as one of the best in venture portfolios. In this conversation, we covered Ian's journey, what it means to build products for space, and what the future holds for this booming industry. Have a listen and enjoy. All right, everybody. I am joined today by an old friend and a classmate and somebody who many of you, if you don't know yet, you're going to know him soon. Ian Cinnamon, the founder and CEO of Apex Space. Ian, it's good to see you. Thanks for being here, man.
Noah, thanks for having me. It's great to see you in all these different settings, and here we are now. So
Here we are.
We're gonna have some fun.
It's going to be awesome. How did we get here, man? Like that's the first question is how did Ian end up running a space company? Because from games to software, now space, like, man, that's quite a journey. How'd you get on this latest odyssey?
Yeah. So clearly all those three things are the exact same thing. So there we go. No, it doesn't sound like it necessarily all connects, but it somehow all led to Apex making satellites. So the quick bluff of it is effectively out of college had the opportunity to work directly for this brilliant, successful entrepreneur by the name of Mark Pincus, and was his effectively technology advisor, very similar to like a chief of staff role. And obviously he started a gaming company called Zynga, had the opportunity to work with him there, start a company with him there, sell that back to Zynga. And really my only goal with that role was to surround myself with people who were far smarter than me, where I could learn by osmosis, right? Let me put myself next to them, absorb everything I could. And I did. And it was an amazing couple of years right out of college in Silicon Valley. If you've seen the HBO show Silicon Valley, there were definitely some moments that were probably literally right out of that show, a little too close to home, but it was a great show. I hope they bring it back. That's my one request on this podcast. If you know those producers, have them bring it back.
There it is. Waiting for them to sponsor Crossing the Valley too. So
hey, I'm all for that. So let's go make a dedicated effort there. And learned a lot about, if you're going to build something, you really want to give it your all. It needs to be meaningful for you, et cetera. So I ended up, after really learning everything I could from Mark, going off and spreading my wings and flying and starting the company that I was working on when we met, Noah, which was Synapse, doing AI and computer vision for different national security applications. It was based on the research I had done in my undergrad that was funded by the Department of Homeland Security and the Department of Defense, and really tied into what I knew best, right? It tied together artificial intelligence, computer vision, software, as well as an understanding of the national security space, and had the opportunity to build that company and grow it over several years, and eventually ended up selling that to Palantir. And at Palantir, got to take all the technology we developed and apply it to downstream satellite data, which is where I saw this major bottleneck in the space industry that I started Apex to solve. There we go. That's the 2-minute summary of how all paths lead to Apex.
It's pretty good. One thing that's cool, and I don't want to move off of this just yet because I think it's really unique to you and to some of the other folks that we've had on the show. But there are people who you could have had a whole career at probably working with Mark, certainly at Palantir. We saw those guys the other day. Like Palantir's flying high right now. They're having a ton of fun and they're shaking stuff up. You can have careers at any of these places. At what point in your life did you say, I'm the kind of person who builds companies, I don't get jobs? Like, was that at 6, at 12, at 18, at 24? Like, where along the line did that click for you?
Oh man, that's a great question. Actually, one of the first times I really realized that was in college. And it was actually ironic because I was taking a aerospace class. And one of the things that I would always do in college was try to talk to my peers who are older, right, who are graduating or were doing internships. And I would say, what are you doing? What do you want to go do when you grow up, when you graduate? Like what does your career trajectory look like? And what I noticed was a lot of the folks in aerospace at the time, this was back in, I was taking these classes in 2009, 2010 or so. A lot of these folks were going off and saying, oh, my dream is to go work for one of the large defense industrial base companies, right? A Northrop, a Lockheed, an L3, or I'm going to go work for JPL or NASA. And those are great companies, great entities. They've done amazing work. But what I realized was if I were to go be employed at such a large organization, kind of that kind of rigid kind of structure and how it works, like I wouldn't survive an hour. Like I feel like I would just get fired. So I don't know if it was so much like, hey, like, this just isn't for me, or it was more like, hey, I don't think I could get a job at any of these places. Like my personality is just not compatible with that. So I realized that I still love these industries, but it was something where I needed to essentially carve my own path to some degree.
Talk about this sometimes with folks who are looking to make the jump and are thinking of starting things. It's like, how are you going to make yourself unemployable? Like, do
Yes,
that. You just burn the boats.
exactly. Like I don't even know what it would look like to go interview for some job or what. Well, it's a whole different world.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, in some ways, yes, and in some ways, probably not that different than raising money or closing sales. We'll get there. We'll get there. So Ian, you sold to Palantir. You started looking at this problem that you found, and it's around satellite buses. Give us kind of the primer, the 101 on what was the problem and how did you work your way to a solution?
So I will say, up until I would argue about the year 2020, there really was no problem. Right. The space industry, I would argue, has moved along phenomenally well over the many decades since its origins. Right. I'm actually sitting here right now in Playa Vista, really in the heart of the old Hughes Aerospace campus, which is where a lot of space really got its start. And when I think back then, right, the progress that was made between then and into the 2000s was pretty phenomenal. But something huge changed in the years between 2015 and 2020. And what really changed was our ability to get things from Earth up to space took a turn. And it went from, hey, our access to space was something that happened very infrequently. We were reliant on very few launch opportunities. It was very expensive. Shifted the moment that SpaceX started reliably flying the Falcon 9 and reusing it. And what happened was their internal costs to get to orbit went way down. Price point went down, maybe not way down, but it went down. And the frequency of launch, like the number of times they were launching a year, a month, a week, went way up. And if you think about this as an analogy to you buy something on the internet, right? And you have to pay $100 for shipping and it arrives in a year versus you buy something on the internet and shipping is free and it arrives in 2 days, like Amazon Prime, right? You're probably going to buy a whole lot more things. And the same thing happened with the space industry where people realized, wow, I can ship things to space much faster and cheaper than before. There's all these new things that now make sense, right? You would model out a business case or an ROI for a government or an allied nation, and they'd say, here's the cost, here's the trade-off, should we put more into orbit? And what happened was the entire industry in about 2020 started to shift. And the shift was from a traditional mindset of what I call very bespoke, exquisite satellite systems. So these are satellites that might cost hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars. They're designed to last 10, 20, 30 years in orbit. And those are, think of them almost like the battleship of space, right? This thing's going up there. It's going to work. Nothing's going to go wrong. And frankly, that's worked really well. But what happened in 2020 is because of the frequency of launch changing, a new architecture was able to open up. And that was what we call the proliferated attritable architecture. So great buzzwords, but proliferated, a whole lot of something, and attritable, meaning it's fairly replaceable. So instead of designing a system that should last 20 years, you design a system that's designed to last 3 or 5 years, and you design them to be smaller and cheaper. So you launch a whole bunch of them. So if somebody cyber attacks 5 or 10 or shoots one down or whatever it may be, well, you still have a whole network of that. And we're noticing this happen, frankly, not just in space, but I'm sure from the other guests you've had on the show, you've looked at this across all forms of defense and warfare, right? Like, look at this happening on the drone side, right? The replicator program and others. It's the same mindset, right? It's how do we shift into this kind of proliferated, attritable world, and now it's coming to space. And frankly, no company was set up to go build satellites in a proliferated, attritable mindset, and specifically the satellite platform, which in the industry is known as a bus. And that's what Apex does. Here we are.
It's an awesome laydown. Thank you for making that layman speak for us and our listeners. I think there's, it's funny you mentioned drones. Trey Stevens had I think a tweet earlier today, or what do you call it now? An X? I think it's a
An
tweet,
X, an
an
X,
X,
something.
an action around, three new companies all starting, all saying we're making type 1 through 3 UAS, drones, and we've learned the lessons from Israel and Ukraine. It's like, why? So everybody's rushing into that one, but the satellite bus space, at least when you guys started, was not super crowded. Why do you think that was?
Satellite buses are less obvious, right? Unless you're really in the industry, it's not talked about, right? It's not something that you see all the time, right?
Right.
You go
Versus
on.
if you live in New Jersey, you experience drones.
No, like New Jersey. I mean, actually, those are aliens, right? So
Aliens,
those are
yes,
not
yes.
drones. Those are aliens who have come to Earth. So let's just be very crystal clear on that, right? We don't want to mistake the audience here.
That's
But,
right. We got to only the
we can't
facts here.
mislead people. Let's just be fair. But what I would just say is, like, you go on X, Twitter, whatever it is. At least my feed, right? Depending on, I guess, who I follow. I love all these kind of OSINT accounts and all of that. But what do you see left and right? You see all these drones flying and modified toys, basically, like making it into the battlefield. Like, you also see a lot of satellite data, but you don't see satellites. You don't understand where those satellites came from, right? You're not seeing the hardware. So it's just something that's a little bit out of sight, and out of sight, out of mind, right? You're not seeing it every day, right? You can't look up in the sky and, well, you can see a satellite, but usually you don't know what you're looking at. You think it's a star, right? Like, you don't know what's going on there. So it's just a different world.
I think that's very fair and probably very true. And as you stepped into this and said, "All right, we're going to go after this," I want to talk about a couple of formational questions, and then we'll move forward. But so two in particular. First, how did you think about kind of the team, both of your co-founder Max, the people you wanted to surround yourself with, and then the investor stack? Like, what kind of people did you want to bring together at the beginning? And I think you have, Ian, an interesting take maybe on fundraising. Like, a lot of founders, for it's kind of a badge of glory or of honor of like, hey, we early days of defense tech, it was like, we raised this much or we raised that much, or well, we raised even more. And it's, how did you think about that kind of early days of Apex?
From the beginning, what I realized was we're trying to be a company fundamentally that is built to support this proliferated, attritable movement, right? And that meant supporting commercial companies, and it meant supporting defense customers, right? Which is both primes. Like, I would love to partner with everybody from the Andurils to the Northrops to the L3s, et cetera, Lockheeds, and on and on and on, as well as the commercial companies that are out there, as well as directly with the government. And I knew if we were going to build a company that was trying to cater to that specific market, right? Proliferated, attritable systems, for both dual use customers, you had to build the company with that mindset. And that meant you couldn't lean all the way into the new space mentality and go hire a team just out of SpaceX. You couldn't lean into the traditional space and just hire people straight out of, Northrop or wherever it may be. You had to create this hybrid. And the reason was, if you lean too far into the new space direction, you'll move super fast, but the risk tolerance is not compatible with how these customers think and work, right? If you don't own the constellation end to end, you basically are certifying a per vehicle kind of uptime and capability and quality, as opposed to a per constellation level, right? So if you take Starlink, for example, Starlink can go ahead and launch however many satellites they want. It doesn't matter if half of them don't work, as long as when you buy a terminal, you have internet. Versus if we're selling the satellite to a customer and half of them don't work, that's a problem. So you have to lean into that mindset. At the same time, these customers want to move to moving much faster. So if you go too much to traditional aerospace, where it takes 2 to 6 years to get a satellite bus designed, built, and delivered, then you might as well just go with traditional aerospace. So we had to thread the needle perfectly. So I wanted to bring together a team that married traditional, non-traditional, and then the third kind of the X factor in there is non-space. So I don't come from a space background, right? I come from a software and kind of human factors background. But if you bring in kind of that first principles thinking and asking those questions with traditional and non-traditional, it really creates this magical moment. So my co-founder Max, absolutely brilliant, comes from the SpaceX background, knows how to manufacture things light and fast. He also is very unique in that he was able to not just work on the Falcon 9 program, but some of Starlink as well, and really understood the satellite side and had deep ties there. Myself having, obviously the non-space background, and then we very rapidly hired a team that came from some of that traditional space background as well. And we kind of married everything together. So a little bit unique for this industry, but I think again, it goes back to what is the product we're selling? Who are we selling it to? What is that product market fit? And different products require different types of teams. So we are very strategic and intentional about that team that we create.
Yeah, no, it's an awesome answer and a breakdown. And I want to foot stomp something, which is to disrupt an existing industry. A lot of the times you hear, well, we're just going to bring in total outsiders, right? Like we're the SaaS people coming to take on cruise missiles, or sorry, that sounds like it's not.
Honestly,
We're the
I've
SaaS
seen
people taking
some, I've
on
seen some startups that are
whatever.
doing it, man.
Yeah, no, I mean, and sometimes it works, absolutely. But I think there's a lot of folks who it's almost an identity of we are the outsiders. I think your ability to marry that, like, hey, we're going to take that first principles approach to like, well, why is this the way it is? You can ask those questions, but then you also have the people on the team who can answer those questions and who can help you, create better answers. So I think that's a really important kind of marriage of those different sides there. So that's an awesome answer on the team front. Other kind of early days things. Talk just briefly about kind of the how much your fundraise, your early raise, and then you guys had rapid success, and then kind of put some more money behind it. So how did you think about capital out of the gate?
We started by thinking about long term what we wanted to do, right? And the goal with Apex is very clear. We want to create a company that, frankly, will stand the test of time and be a true institution, right? I want to be running this thing until I'm too old and they drag me out of here and the next generation comes in to run it, right? The goal here is not to sell it. The goal here is not to take it public and then close our eyes and be like, what happens next? It's like really create an institution. So that was the first thing. Like it's all about the long term. And if it's about the long term, you realize that the money that you take in, it's like a marriage where there's no divorce, right? Like you can't really take equity out of somebody's hands. When they own part of you, they own part of you, and that's it. So we had those two things in mind. And the third component that we threw in there was we kind of looked at each other and we said, like, look, if there was a way to do this where we didn't need to raise $1 and we could still move at the pace that we wanted to and the scale that we wanted to, that would be our dream. Right? Like we don't want to raise money. I don't think raising money is fun. I don't think it's something to be proud of. I think you should be proud of delivering products that work, support the warfighter, support your customers, right? Being proud of raising money is bullshit, to be honest. With that in mind, we tried to find like-minded investors and only raise the money that we really needed to get to the right milestones that we needed to basically kind of turn on what I call like the unit economic flywheel. We were very fortunate to have Andreessen Horowitz come in and lead our seed round, right? They really value aligned with Catherine Boyle and the American Dynamism practice, understood what we were doing. Very shortly thereafter, we were able to bring XYZ, Ross Fumini over there in as well. And then in our Series A, we also brought in Shield Capital, who's phenomenal, really deeply understands this industry. And then in our Series B, we're able to bring in both XYZ again as a lead with Charles River Ventures co-leading as well. So bringing together these just like very select, brilliant group of folks who deeply understand what we're doing and deeply understand kind of how we want to be as capital lean as possible it is really key to what we do.
Yeah, no, I think it's an important answer. And it's typically you hear, well, in very capital intensive, hardware is really capital intensive. You got to raise a lot of money. That, hearing a different approach, I think is refreshing and also enlightening for folks who may be thinking about this sort of thing.
I hope so.
TBD, right? So as you guys got going, Ian, I want to now kind of bring us into the meat and potatoes of the go-to-market piece here. You mentioned early, being a dual use company and thinking both about the commercial business and the government as a customer, the defense market. Where did you guys go first? How did you make initial discussion or decisions around your early conversations?
What I will say is my take here is the government is never really an ideal first customer. And the reason for that is the government is very good at asking for what they know. Right. So if you try to go in there and you say, I want to sell you this thing, and they'll say, well, we're buying this other thing. Here's the requirements that we're buying too. This is how it works. Like you kind of get into a stalemate. You could go do some of these sibbers or some of these other things, but those aren't real. Like those are sure, they're revenue that comes in, but it's not like real meaningful dollars, right? It's like small business set aside. It's not really something I would write home about. So we leaned harder into the commercial side at first and said, look, commercial companies are going to have varying risk tolerance, but there's going to be some that have a higher risk tolerance and are willing to work with a new player. Commercial companies also are able to iterate at a much faster speed in terms of kind of budget cycles and understanding kind of what the economics of their business look like. Really, we started out on that front. So what we said was the very first satellite we wanted to launch, we would pay for and fund and fly ourselves as kind of a demo to the world that it works. And after that, we'd start selling them. So before the launch of our first one, we were very fortunate to sell the second satellite we were building to a commercial company who took a risk on us. And we are so appreciative of them for that. And that really helped move things forward for us to show that, hey, look, not only are we flying it ourselves, but the second one that we're building, somebody is, willing to say, okay, I believe in this. And
before the first one had flown, before it was launched.
Before the first one had flown, they took a big risk on us, and I think we're really doing right by them. And they knew that they wouldn't take delivery of theirs until the first one had flown, which is great. But we're very fortunate to be able to work with them.
Yeah, that's pretty neat. What a cool vote of confidence. That's got to feel really, really good. How did that conversation come about? Like, so, or as you guys were funding and developing that first one, and we'll come back and talk about the speed piece because that's a story I don't want to bury. But just to pull the thread here on that conversation, what do you think made it possible at that stage?
Yeah. So honestly, the first sale is always, I would argue, the hardest, right? Because you have to prove to the world that, what you're doing is real, and you can't really point to anything. You just have to say, trust me, or talk to my engineers. They're really smart. Which works, but everyone is smart engineers, right? Like no one as smart as ours, but like people have great teams. So really it was two things. One is we lean into transparency to talk about exactly where we are. But the second big element was we were very unwavering in what we were doing as a company. So what I mean by that is as a business, right, we build the satellite bus platform, right? It's the core parts of the satellite minus the payload, right? Payload's a camera, the sensor. This company was looking to buy a satellite bus platform, and we convinced them to let us into their trade, right? They were talking to a few different vendors. They were debating whether they should build it themselves. And they let us kind of respond to their request for proposal. And we did. And in our response, we were very honest about what we do. And we said, okay, we meet all of your requirements except for these because we're building a standard product. We cannot modify it. And I remember they were a little taken aback and they were like, wait a minute, like normally everybody else is saying that like they'll bend to what we want. You're saying no, that's strange. And we said, yes, we are saying no, but here's a trade-off. We think it'll still work if you guys do the following things. But two, if you let us do what we said we're going to do and stick to our plan, we can deliver this much faster than anybody else because it's the same one we're already building. Versus all the other bids they got were effectively brand new designs. So they ended up, not immediately saying yes to us. In fact, they said no. And then they came back and they said, you know what, like, we like the fact that you guys are sticking to your guns and it'll be the same one that's already flying. And that actually gives us more confidence. And we were very fortunate to sign them.
That's really cool. So that's an example of, and this is a commercial customer, an example of a product sale actually being an asset, not a liability. Whereas, I think you see a lot of people go into the government, for example, and try to sell product, and like the government buys solutions. They want answers to or they want
Yeah, they want solve my problem, right? They don't even want to. I would argue they want like the data or the insights, right? They don't even want the system.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
Yeah. No, so that's an interesting, and it's a really strong data point in favor of, hey, commercial first can be useful. You also called out, I think, one of the key differentiators for, as I understand it, the Apex story, which is the speed component. I mean, you guys moved unbelievably quickly to get your first bus into orbit. Was that a deliberate part of the strategy, or that was a byproduct of hey, we built a good team and we put everything into place? Like, talk about the role of speed for you guys.
When I talk about how like obsessed we are with getting to the right product market fit and understanding what our customers want, a big piece of that was really trying to deeply understand what would move the needle for customers, commercial, government, everything in between. And what we realized was there were three key things when it came to satellite bus platform. Number one was speed. And it wasn't even could you build it faster? It's just like, if you tell us it'll be delivered on this date, just like don't be late. Like it was literally that. It was like, just don't screw up. Don't be late. Like, come on. And we were like, well, let's take that a step further and let's give them timelines they've never heard of before and hit that. And what we realized is if you can actually move faster than they want, people will pay more. Budgets somehow go up. And it makes sense, right? Like think about a commercial company. You're monetizing every day in orbit, right? You're selling the data, you're whatever it may be. If you're a government, you're getting an ROI off of that for every day in orbit. So every day of delay is costing you money. So the sooner you get up, the better it is and more they can pay. The second thing that really mattered was price transparency. And what I mean by that is go on our website and you could see how much a satellite bus costs. Normally in the industry, it would be, okay, Noah, can you send me a basically request and then we'll set up a meeting with our engineers and then you'll send me an RFP. And then about 6 months later, I'll get you a price, right? We can deliver the satellite bus in 6 months, let alone a price. And people appreciated that. And then the third thing was if you're building the same thing over and over again, speed matters, right? Or sorry, quality goes up because it's the same thing. So we leaned really hard into the speed aspect. And the honest truth of how we did it was we booked the launch, right? And the way that these launches work are we flew on SpaceX's Falcon 9 and we bought it from SpaceX. And if you miss your launch and you don't get things done in time, you basically have to pay them a rebooking fee. And what I told our team is we're not going to pay the rebooking fee. So effectively, we have a hard deadline and we need to build to that deadline. And it was a scramble. It was a lot. It took many flights all over the world of, convincing suppliers to, make it work with us. But at the end of the day, what's important here is we did not launch the minimum viable product. We actually launched the real production product, of which I have three more leaving the clean room at the end of this year. This will probably go live in 2025 or recording in 24. So at the end of 24, they'll leave the clean room. And it's the same thing that we've already flown now going to our customers, right? And that is rare and something to be I'm immensely proud of.
Yeah. So for those of you, as an incentive, if you're on YouTube here, we'll show I'm on the Apex website right now. You can go ahead and buy an Aries bus with their baseline configuration for about $3.45 million. Or you could get a little bit ambitious and go for the Geo Aries for 13.5. Ian, how many of those do you own right now?
So I would love to say I have my own personal fleet of satellites, but they don't pay me enough here. So I don't know what to say about that.
Yeah.
But what I will say is for all our listeners out there, if you have a corporate credit card, we do accept the deposit over credit card. So go ahead and reserve your satellite bus and we'll get it to you ASAP.
Look at that.
We actually have had a customer buy it with the credit card. So, they bought it on their phone and there we go.
Was that a government purchase card, a GPC?
That one was a commercial customer.
Okay.
But
I was excited. We were going to get the IG involved here real quick. I don't want to do that. We don't want to do that.
You should want to say, yeah.
No, of course. Awesome. Now, it's really, I think, the speed of adaptation, and there's a lot that you just shared there, and that we could unpack. I mean, even just we didn't go to space with an MVP. I mean, it kind of goes when you think about your background in the software space. You think about kind of these lean startup principles that get kind of piped around, especially in Silicon Valley. It's like just ship something. It's like, well, no, it's not just something. It's the product. We know enough to be able to put the right thing up there and to get it right on the first try. It's a really rare thing. So kudos to you guys. It's super cool to watch.
It's not easy, right? And like I think about it, even on our same SpaceX launcher, the one right before, right? There were other great companies out there, and it's terrible, right? Like Impulse's satellite died on orbit, True Anomalies as well, and it's those are great companies, right? And I'm very hopeful for them in the future. But seeing failures on orbit is tough for everybody, and space is really freaking hard, is all I can say. And it really took having the right team and the right principles to be able to pull that off.
Yeah, undoubtedly. Let's get to the kind of the conversation here around the government customer, Ian, because we've covered now why commercial first made a good deal of sense, but true to dual use core, you guys have broached kind of the government border and have landed meaningful deals in defense. Not even yes with the government directly, but also via partners. You guys recently announced kind of a partnership with Anduril, and in fact, I think you said that you were carrying some Anduril tech even on that first launch that was undisclosed. So that's pretty cool. Tell us
Yes.
about how's the federal sales process been going for you guys?
So, no, you mentioned this earlier, but when you think about the government, right, their primary goal is to buy a capability. And if they can't buy a capability, they'll buy a system. And if they can't buy a system, they'll buy a component or a product. So we are lowest on the value chain in terms of what they want to go buy, right? We are not a capability. We're not a system. Like they got to go bolt a payload to us. So what I will say is our primary method of supporting the warfighter, supporting allied nations, is to be that component supplier to the great system integrators and to the great primes. And we will never be exclusive to anyone, right? We're merchant suppliers. We work with Anduril, we work with others, right? We're very fortunate to have those relationships in place. And it really allows us to focus on the repeatability and the reuse of the same product that we're making again and again and again. And what I always like to say is if we do our job right, people don't have to second guess or think about the satellite bus platform, right? They know they could get it from us. And if it's an Apex one, it works, it's good, don't overthink it. So that's our mindset there. That being said, right, I would say our work right now, and if you look at our sales, it's about 50-50 split, both direct with government and then through these system integrators. So what I found interesting is while our instinct has been, okay, let's focus on working through these system integrators and enable them to win and be more efficient. When we talk about the new administration and things like Doge, right? Like the idea of how can we come and help these established defense industrial based primes be more efficient, like, spend less money, avoid cost plus contracts. Like we are an enabling factor of that. So we're very happy for that. What I would say though is it's great to do that. We have been surprised that we have had now multiple engagements where the government will directly reach out and say, I have a GFE payload, which stands for government furnished equipment, meaning they own some payload they need to get to orbit. And they say, what is a satellite? It's a payload plus a bus platform. So Apex, can you be the one to carry it? There's way more of those than I ever thought there would be, which is phenomenal. So we're engaging in that domain as well. What I will say is it really is something where working with the government in general, my mentality on it is it's very much a hurry up and wait game where, you work very hard, you establish relationships, and then it's crickets. And then all of a sudden, there was an email we got last night that basically, I won't name who the specific group in the government was, but they basically said, hey, I have a payload. I am launching it in 90 days. I need a bus. And like 90 days is like for the listeners here who are familiar with the space industry, deciding on a satellite bus 90 days before launch is unheard of. Like the test reports you need to do to be certified to fly in a rocket take longer than that. So it to me though, the fact that we are their first call when they have an issue with their prior bus supplier or something else happened is a phenomenal indication of them thinking of us in that right way. So there are more and more of those opportunities, frankly, than I expected.
That is a huge vote of confidence. And as we know, like, government work, for anything to move on that time frame is crazy. They can't get sibbers out the door in 90 days half the time. That's really, really
Yeah,
impressive.
I was going to say, like, we might say yes, but then how in the world are they going to pay us in 90
Right.
days? That just doesn't work.
It's well, when you figure that one out, we'll have you back on. You can tell
Yeah,
that
exactly.
story.
Hey, if you can go get rid of a CR and get us back onto a real budget, Noah, I don't know. I don't know what I'll give you a free satellite. How about that?
There it is. That's hey, you heard it here first, listeners. That's an Aries, a Geo Aries. You can get for
Be careful what you ask for.
If anybody wants to help with the CR, Ian's phone number will be in the show notes. So the on this piece, before we move off of this particular kind of conversation, these kind of opportunistic chances to sell to the government, I think, are great. When you think about full potential, right? Companies will talk about shaping programs or competing on big programs. Like, what do you think full potential for Apex looks like in the federal government? What's the structure, the sales structure that you guys are are chasing right now?
It's a really good question. So there's a couple things that I would love to see come together. So the first is on the government side, I think a strong push away from cost plus contracts in space to firm fixed price. So there's no reason if we're able to build satellite buses as true products that we should be reinventing the wheel every time, wasting taxpayer dollars and rebuilding these bus platforms. Payloads are a little more unique, but you should be able to get those on a FFP. There's no reason you shouldn't. So shifting into that mindset is, I think, important. Forget Apex just for the industry. It allows us to move faster. It incentivizes the right things. Of course, Apex is built for that mentality too. So that's the first thing I would say. The second thing that I would say is from Apex's perspective is being kind of the first call for a satellite bus from pretty much everybody, right? Like, it's in the same way where there's certain parts where if you need, for example, you get a job at pretty much any company in the world, right? And you're either going to get like a Dell, an HP, or a MacBook, right? Like it's just like those default three. I would love in the same way, like if you're going to go buy a satellite bus, like you just call up Apex, right? Not three, just one, right? You call us up and we're here to support. Like, by the way, if there's more competition out there, would love to see that, right? Like that would be phenomenal. It's good for the industry. Right now, there's not. So would love to be great. Like, of course, I'm going to go with Apex. And look, if you need something custom, you need something bespoke, sure, like we'll refer you to other great suppliers out there. But seeing that shift of where that first call, I think is really where we're going.
Are there programs on the horizon that you guys think are a good fit for Apex, or are you guys shaping any right now that you want to tell us about here?
So, I mean, look, the way space works is it's fairly simple, right? When you're actually putting a satellite into orbit, there's only a handful of organizations, the way that things are set up right now, that do so at scale, right? So that is, of course, the National Reconnaissance Office, NRO. It's Space Force, and then within Space Force, but somewhat adjacent, given kind of the shuffling, is Space Development Agency. You have other groups too, like AFRL, but I would argue that's kind of deeply tied into Space Force. And then, of course, each of the branches have historically, over the years, have launched their own satellites here or there. COCOMs may have launched their own as well, but usually that ties into Space Force. But really, when you see things in bulk, it's coming from one of those first three that I mentioned: NRO, Space Force, SDA. The one that's like, there's a lot brewing that we cannot talk about, but the one that is the easiest to talk about is probably Space Development Agency Tranche 3. For those of you that don't know, Space Development Agency has their proliferated warfighter constellation, PWSA. They did Tranche 0, and which is a demonstration tranche, Tranche 1, Tranche 2, and now they're moving into Tranche 3. And you could think of it as it's a pretty brilliant setup, which is effectively the COCOMs and the warfighters can say, I need these kinds of this data, I need this knowledge, I need whatever it may be that comes from space. And then effectively, these different groups can go to Space Development Agency and say, hey, you're building this proliferated constellation. Can you, in a future tranche, add in this capability or add in this sensor? And then they go ahead and layer that in. So being able to support that and have that organized in a very clear-cut way to bring that all together, I think is phenomenal. Like I think it's all for fixed price contracts. Like it's a government moving in the right direction. It excites me tremendously. They want supplier diversity, which I also think is important. So that is, and Tranche 3, I think they've announced that the first RFPs for the program integration side dropped at the end of 24, and now in 25, things are going to be moving pretty fast. So we are very excited to be a large part of that.
That's awesome. And it's rare that one, that your customer is so well defined, and I think it's also for folks listening, like even at the CEO level, right, to be like, no, there's not that many. These are who they are. This is who we're going after. I think it's easy to talk about kind of capabilities of the types of missions, but to have that pinpointed is a great strength, especially at this stage.
Yeah, if you can't tell, like being very focused on the customer is actually important, right? Like I'm a little obsessed with it, but it's like for I see a lot of like hopes and dreams out there, and I think that look, I love hopes, I love dreams, but like we're talking real dollars here and real ROI for my investors, and for everything that we're doing, and like we better deliver.
Yeah, so as we kind of move to the final maybe portion of our conversation, Ian, I think that's a great segue. you've watched this industry even over the last 2 years. Like the space economy just feels like it's ripping right now. There's all of this energy. There's all of this excitement. There's so many folks looking to break in. I'm going to ask you a question because we started in a place where you were talking about the opportunity spotting you did while at Palantir. As you've gotten deeper and deeper into space, what are some of the opportunities that you might throw out there for aspiring entrepreneurs listening? What are some of the problems or the unmet needs, if you're willing to share, that you think, hey, there's opportunity here?
Look, I think there's a ton of opportunity, right? If you look at kind of the inefficiencies that are out there, it's obvious. What I would just say is, I think human nature is you see an opportunity, everybody kind of layers on, and then you have 1,000 people all trying for the same thing, right? I think we've seen that with replicator and drones and other things too. The best advice I can give is don't look at it from a third party perspective, but really go engage, understand where there's a pain point and there's a gap in the market, and go thrive there, right? So it's not about, don't go listen to me, right? Because I can go say, oh, I think this or that. I would say if you're like truly energized about whether it be space or, supporting Indo-PACOM or whatever it may be, go get a job that puts you there, right? Like you could go work for a Palantir or an Anduril or go, whatever, or the Northrop or Lockheed, and go work in those mission areas, see the gaps, and then it'll be really obvious. But what I would say is like, you really need that firsthand knowledge. Like I was very fortunate to get a Palantir where I saw this firsthand, where you could say, wow, that is a real need. And then you go deep.
There's no shortcut to seeing it yourself or to being in that space. And you guys have been moving at lightning fast speed. It seems like everything is kind of firing on all cylinders and it's all going right. And I'm sure inside the belly of the beast is always a different animal than kind of what we see from the outside. Anything that you know now, 2 years in, that you kind of say, man, I wish we knew this on day one?
Oh, I mean, there's like an unlimited amount that I wish we knew on day one. Like, I mean, look, there's everything from macro trends, right? Like the fact that the industry is accelerating a little bit faster than we anticipated, right? Like that would have been nice to know. The fact that capability desire is increasing, right, at a pace that's higher than we thought. So what I mean by that is, and this makes our life difficult, people always want a little more power, a little more agility. Like, the capabilities on the spacecraft, they want to go a little higher, right? So we design to what we think the market wants. And then of course they always want more. So then we have to figure out how to update our products accordingly. That's par for the course. And then I would just say, like, what it really comes down to is I always wish that things would move faster than they do. I think my whole team and myself are just wired to kind of move at that pace. But there's certain times where, I look back and I'm like, I don't know how we even survived that period. So just being able to take a step back and recognize that, like, it always gets a little bit crazier, I think it's also important. So just reminding myself of that, I think is important.
Awesome. Well, it's a ride that I think is in many ways just beginning. We're excited to follow it. Ian, if some listeners are energized and they want to learn more, or maybe they want to even join the rocket ship here, where should they go? How should they follow up?
So follow us on X, on LinkedIn, go on our website. We're hiring a bunch of roles. So we would love to hire you. Come on board and come help us build a whole bunch of satellites.
Awesome, man. Hey, it's super fun watching you do your thing out there. We're excited for all of what's to come. Best of luck to you, and thanks for making time.
No, you got to come to LA, come in the clean room, help build some satellites.
We'll be out there, no doubt. All right, man. Thanks, you.
Bye.